could just stand. I know we just had food, but just stand so we can energy. Dear Father, we just want to thank you so much for the Sabbath day, dear Father. Thank you for giving us life. And dear Father, for this Men's Day, dear Father, you truly blessed us. And we just ask that you be with Pastor Edmund as he's going to give us a presentation, dear Father. And please be with Brother Bailey as he sings, and also for the Patchogue men and all those involved in this program, dear Father. We thank you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Without further ado, I'm going to call up Pastor Edmund. Amen.
Thank you. And thank you for those of you who returned. Thank you. Those who joined us live, thank you for joining us live. And hopefully those who are downstairs will come up and join us.
Yes.
As soon as possible. Okay, we already had prayer. We're going to have and I need to tell you at the outset, we're going to have a conversation.
This one's strong.
This one's strong, okay. Okay, we're going to have a conversation this afternoon that I hope is going to be enlightening. I hope it's going to be educational. But and I need to tell you on the front end, it's some of what we're going to some of the things that we're going to share are painful and difficult to hear. Most of you, at one point or another, if you've been in the church a long time, you wonder how is it that we have two separate conferences doing the same thing. So I'm imagining in Long Island, although in fact I have preached in Long Island, so I know there's a Northeastern Conference church, and there's a Greater New York church.
Right.
So at least in the 5 boroughs, they cover exactly the same thing. So you've probably wondered how is it that we have two separate organizations doing the same thing? People very few people say to me, well, there's not going to be separate conferences in heaven. That's true. There's not going to be any conferences in heaven. But we're not in heaven yet. So why do we need to have two different conferences? And what people will typically say is, let's get rid of all this and let's all come together, right? So let's have the conversation, and let me share with you from both a historical standpoint and a current standpoint as to why we have regional conferences. I'm not trying to convert anybody. Because this is obviously not a regional conference church. Now, I have done this presentation in non-regional conference churches. And I did it at a state conference camp meeting where most of the people did not look like me. So I've done this on multiple occasions. And some of the reasons, some of the things I'm going to show you historically are not going to be easy for everybody to see. So, and we've reached a point in our country where there are people who say, I had a friend of mine who was Caucasian. He said, we're never going to get past racism if we keep talking about it. As if we stop talking about it, it will all go away. The problem with that is it's not realistic. It also requires people of African American descent to give up a part of their history. In other words, if some of the things, if you're not African American, and some of you clearly are not, if you're not African American, then some of the things are going to be difficult for you to hear. I would simply ask you two things. One is, do not ask me to forget my history, number one. And then number two, if it's difficult for you to hear it, imagine how difficult it was for people like me to live it. So So I need to say it on the front end. Because you know how on TV sometimes they say this is not for ages under 14. This is not for people who do not want to hear the truth. All right? All right. So, so from a historical and present day context, here's why we have regional conferences. All right? Okay. Now it worked when where's it worked. Okay. It was now just a few minutes ago. Am I not doing something? Okay, wait, this is clicking. Yeah. What did you tell me to do that I'm not doing?
Take it on the other.
Oh, okay, what? I'm still not doing it. What is it? Technology is a wonderful thing except when it doesn't work. Okay, so. I'm sorry. I'm putting it down real basic. Yes. Okay. Okay, then, the first thing I want to give, I'm going to take about 2 minutes to tell you what I do. My office coordinates all the things that regional conferences do together. One of the biggest things that we've done is connect with the church in Africa. Most people do not know that almost half of all Seventh-day Adventists live on the continent of Africa. So when you combine people of African descent who actually live in Africa with people of African descent who live in the Caribbean, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, the predominant group in the Adventist church, demographically by far, are people of African descent. That is the largest single group of people. It is the majority of people who are Seventh-day Adventists. They are of African descent, either on the continent of Africa or people whose foreparents descended from Africa. Then, if you throw in people of Spanish descent, okay, the church is somewhere roughly 75% people of color. Okay, now, most people don't know that. Okay, but so the reason why I'm telling you that is you're seeing a picture now of the first African American Leaders Summit. And that was held in Nairobi, Kenya, in 2019. Right? And my office was responsible for setting that. All right. So if I'm in a light color suit. You picked me up, right? Okay. So next to me is going to what is my right, little short fellow standing next to me. He's not the president anymore there. That was the president of the West Central African Division. And then standing next to him, little short fellow, standing next to the real tall guy. Okay, that's the little short fellow. He's the president, he still is. He's the president of the East Central African Division. There are 3 divisions in Africa. Now compare that with the North American division. That covers all, there's just one. In Africa, there are 3 divisions. East Central African Division, South African Indian Ocean. Those 2 are the 2 largest divisions in the world church. Between the 2 of them, they have roughly 40% of all Adventists between those 2 divisions. And then there's another million in West Central Africa, right? So of the roughly 20 million Adventists, 9 million of them live in Africa. Okay. All right. So we had a summit meeting between the African American leaders and the leaders of Africa. safari, and my office was responsible for setting that up. Because the year before, Mrs. Edmond and I went and met with a little short fellow, well, they're both short. The second short fellow away, not the one next to me, the one next to the one that's next to me. Yeah. He's the president. So we met with him in Nairobi, Ms. Edmond and I. We said, would you be interested in a summit meeting between African leaders and African Americans? He said, of course. So Ms. Edmond and I then set everything up because there were about 30 people that went from the United States over there, and you can't take 30 people that far without somebody going over there in advance, setting up the housing, setting up the meals, setting up the excursions. One of the interesting excursions we had was a safari in Kenya, and my wife is a retired church school teacher, and so she and I went on the safari first. And when you go on a safari, at least the one we went on, what you look for are the lions. Which, when you think about it, doesn't make any sense. So we literally rode around for 2 hours looking for the lions, which shows you how crazy human nature is. You're looking for the one thing that can kill you. And because, we're riding in this kind of open car, So we ride around for 2 hours, and finally we see the lions, and they're about as far as you and I are, in an open car. And so by this time, my thing was, okay, now I've seen them, it's time to go. But my wife channeled her inner, she was a kindergarten teacher. She channeled her inner kindergarten teacher, and she's actually talking to them. Here, lion, here, lion. It's time to go. So what that did was that opened up opportunities. This is one of the things I've learned. I've had the opportunity to go to Africa several times now. One of the things that I've learned is people tend to think of Africa like that. Now, we're out. But the reality is the large cities in Africa are much like large cities in the United States.
Yes, for sure.
Now, the further away you get from the cities, the more it looks like that. Okay, so we were in Nairobi, and we rode for about 2 hours. They wanted us to have church in the bush, and so we did. They had baptism, and this is their church. This is their church. Now I also preached They have some very large churches, nice buildings, several very expensive buildings, but that's out. And they took us, they showed us the school. I think the total, they had 4 teachers. I think the teachers were making like $200 a month. But now and it was so far out that the further away we got from Nairobi, the worse the roads got. So I have a Fitbit because I walk every day. The roads were so bad, my Fitbit registered 20,000 steps. It did. I was going like but it was a wonderful Okay, now, this is the opposite end. This is Johannesburg.
Yeah.
Okay. That's Nelson Mandela. And I don't know if we're in front of a very high-end mall or in the same complex. But while there are too many poor people in Africa, there are people in Africa doing very well.
Yes.
And so the person in the middle, his wife works for the South African government. The day after we left, she was meeting with the president of the country. she took us to the little mall area. The first thing I noticed, because so you don't think of malls and interstates. Where I was staying I was staying across the interstate. You don't think of interstates in Africa, but that was their equivalent of an interstate. Terrible traffic during rush hour, just like New York, right? And so across the interstate was a middle class mall. That was the upper class mall, where as soon as I walked in there, I said, okay, the only thing I can afford in here is the newspaper. His wife in the blue, she pulled up to take us to lunch in a Jaguar. You think she made a few dollars? Okay, all right. So that's Nelson Mandela. And he is a hero in South Africa because he refused to hate. As horrifically as he was treated, he refused to hate. And that's why their country, instead of fighting each other, that's the most prosperous country in South Africa. And he has a lot to do with that. All right, so when we went to Africa, there were people, a number of people who said, we'd like you to come back. Do something. So as a result, I've been back several times. We were supposed to have the second summit meeting because it cost us about $100,000 for all of us to go over there. So we weren't going back the next year. But at the end of the summit, the West Central African president did the closing devotional. He said, I want you to come back next year. Only this time I want you to come to my division, West Central Africa, and that's the Ivory Coast. So in January, I flew to the Ivory Coast to set up the second meeting, which was to be in April of 2020. But we all know what happened. The pandemic hit. And so we've only been able to connect through Zoom. We've made in contact. I just got a call yesterday. And I think I'm going to go over there next year if Ms. Edna lets me. She took the pandemic very seriously, as well she should. Okay, so, all right, so that gives you a little bit, of what I did. Now let's talk about America around the time the regional conferences started. Okay. Now, so here's the first difficult thing to hear. But you already know it before I say it. Both the United States and the Seventh-day Adventist Church are very important to me. I've had the privilege of traveling on 4 continents. The United States is by far the best country in the world. All the things wrong with it. It's the best country in the world. The Seventh-day Adventist Church is God's church. With all the things wrong with it.
Yes, it is.
My grandmother heard this message from Edson White on the Morning Star in Pittsburgh, Mississippi. So, my family has been Adventist for a long time. In fact, when I was growing up, I had no non-Adventist relatives on either side of my family. So now I'm going to tell you how Adventist I am. All Adventist schools, then became an Adventist preacher, right? Okay. But I married somebody who's the only Adventist in her family. My wife, my sister, and my mother are Adventists. My father-in-law is not. Wonderful person. He's a contractor. He built my mother-in-law's church and donated the land. Okay, wonderful person, but a Baptist. So he's not a Baptist. So I'm telling you how Adventist I am. I go. My wife and I got married in 1970. This is the 70s, before Breath of Life really took off on the circuit. So I wake up Sabbath morning, visiting my girlfriend at that time, my wife now. I get up, and I hear something as a lifelong Adventist I have never heard in my life. I heard a television playing on the Sabbath. I didn't even know TVs worked on the Sabbath. I'd never heard of television. My father-in-law was watching television. And then later on, my mother-in-law was cooking chitlins for my father. I didn't know what chitlins were because it's not Southerners. You don't want to know what chitlins are. Believe me, when I found out, I didn't want to know either. Okay, you are not Southerners, so you don't know. Okay, so, and then she was cooking frog legs, and I said, this is a zoo in here. So, nobody is more Adventist than me. Nobody is more committed to this church than me. But the United States and the Seventh-day Adventist Church have an unfortunate, ugly history of racism. Yes. Both of them do. Okay. To pretend otherwise is dishonest. That's right. That's right. That's true. All right. Now, is it always comfortable to talk about? No. But it's important to hear each other. Okay. And so that's what I'm hoping this conversation is. We hear each other. All right. So this is Emmett Till. Okay. Most of you know the story of Emmett Till. Visited his relatives in Mississippi. Was accused falsely of relating inappropriately to a Caucasian lady. That's how we ended up. So that's the context of what the country was like when regional conferences got started. And unfortunately, the Adventist Church followed the world instead of leading the world. So the United States was segregated at that time, so was the Adventist Church. All right? All right. So, and we'll come back to that. So, now we're talking about what is a regional conference. What is a regional conference? Most people, when they think of regional conferences, they think those are black conferences. Technically, that's not true. A regional conference is all the churches in a region that form a conference, as opposed to all the conferences in a state. So there's two kind of conferences. There's state conferences, which tend to be, once upon a time, primarily Caucasian. Now the reality is, Greater New York used to be a Caucasian conference. It is not anymore, which is a problem. And I'll talk to you about that. I'll tell you what the problem is. And that is, we unfortunately, partially because of racism, but not always, not just because of racism. What has happened in Greater New York is, as people of color have moved into churches like this, the Caucasians have moved out. So much so that we have lost in essence, with the exception of a few, we've lost a whole conference full of people who are Caucasian. A whole conference. And that's unfortunate. That's unfortunate. Okay. So Greater New York, it's not really even a state conference, it's a city conference. But most conferences are, most Caucasian conferences are state conferences, even though what's happening in Greater New York is happening in other places. As people of color move in, it's happening in Florida. It's already happened in England. In London, our priest over there for camp meeting, there were very few people who were not of color, even though that's not how the conference started, right? So that's happening. In fact, the reality is, inside the city limits you can hardly find a majority Caucasian church inside the city limits of any city of any size in the United States. Wow. Okay. There are there may be, most of you would have a hard time identifying a primarily Caucasian church inside the 5 boroughs. Okay. That's true of Atlanta. There are no primarily Caucasian churches in Atlanta. That's probably true of most major cities. All right. And all the reasons for that are not racist, but part of that problem is a race problem. Okay, so state conferences used to be primarily Caucasian. That's still true of most of the conferences. It's not true of all of them. Florida conference is probably majority minority. Greater New York is almost entirely minority. There are other conferences, but those are the 2 biggest examples of conferences whose demographics have completely flipped. All right? Now, not state conferences. Regional conferences are all the churches in a region. So let's look at the first regional conference, which is Lake Region. The Lake Region Conference is made up of churches in Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, and Minnesota. Okay? While a state conference is made up of usually 1 or 2 states. So, like where Lake Region is, you have the Michigan Conference, the Illinois Conference, the Indiana Conference, etc., etc. All right? Because I'm going the wrong way. Okay, so here's your question. Why do we have 2 separate conferences? Aren't regional conferences a duplication of services? Okay? So let's answer that question. But I need some volunteers to help me answer that question. So I need 6 people to get up, come down. But we have 6 people. There's 1, 2, there's 4. I need 2 more. I need 2 more.
Haley, come on, Haley.
Here's 5. Come on. There you go. That's 6. Okay. I'm gonna put 5 of you on this side. And I'm gonna put you on this side. Okay. Now the question is: are regional conferences a duplication of service? Because the narrative is let's all come together, and typically, what they mean when let's all come together, it's regional conferences closed. In other words, state conferences are not saying let's all come together to regional conferences. What it sounds good, let's all come together, but let's be clear on what that means. All right. So you are Lake Region. You're the first regional conference. All right. You are the state conferences inside Lake Region territory. Okay, so you're Illinois Conference, you're the Indiana Conference, you're the Michigan Conference, you're the Wisconsin Conference, and you're the Minnesota Conference. Okay, now, he's being told that he's a duplication of services, right? Okay. But he covers the same territory they do. So he has a conference office, right? Conference office. It's a nice one too, right? Okay. But he has a conference, she has a conference, she has a conference, she has a conference, he has a conference, right? Okay, conference office, right? Okay, now, they have a president, right? But so does Michigan. I forget what I call it. Who are you? Illinois. So does Indiana Conference. Wisconsin Conference has a president, and Minnesota Conference, right? Okay. Then he has, Lake Region has departmental directors, like the youth director, the education director. He has that. But guess what? Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Minnesota. Okay? That's funny. I don't think he has an Adventist book center anymore, but let's say he did. So there's an Adventist book center here. No, let's say campground. He has a campground. Okay? But guess what? Michigan has a campground. Illinois has a campground. Indiana has a campground. Wisconsin and Minnesota. All right? Okay. So, I need you to think with me. who's duplicating services? The one of him or the five of them?
Five of them.
Which costs less money to operate? Okay? Right. Who has the better business model? The one of everything or the five of everything? Okay. But despite the fact that he operates with roughly half the income that they do, since regional conferences have started, he's grown 4 times faster than they have. But what they are doing is they're saying, you close down, because we all want to come together. You close down and you come over to us. Now, if I'm operating, now I'm not saying we need to get rid of them at all, but if I'm operating 2 businesses and I can only keep one, do I keep the one that's growing 4 times faster, or do I keep the other one? No. Okay. When you don't know history, you swallow the Kool-Aid, which says they're the norm, he's the aberration. That he needs to become like them. Okay? Now, there's nothing wrong with them, except when they say you need to become like us. The solution, see, us all coming together sounds nice. And when people say it, a lot of you say it. And you mean well. Okay? But understand what you are really saying. Now, you don't know you're saying it. But they are never closing down to join him. Ever. Ever. Okay? So what they really mean is you need to close down and join us. Now, what I'm going to show you later is the only reason why he exists is because the General Conference, which at that point leadership was entirely Caucasian, said we have a choice between full integration and regional conferences. We chose not to have full integration. We chose that. We said we're not going to integrate. We're going to give you regional conferences. So when they say close down, what they're really saying is we made you start regional conferences because we didn't want to integrate. Now that we do want to integrate, we want to make you shut down the entities that we made you start when we didn't want to integrate. And that's why for regional conferences, it's a non-starter. It's not going to happen. Okay. Now, we have 58 conferences. If the discussion is we have too many conferences and some regional conferences need to merge into state conferences, I'm willing to hear that conversation. But I'm not only willing to hear that conversation. Really coming together means some of them gotta merge too. And they have to merge with regional conferences. That's right. At which point the conversation usually stops. Okay. Wow. So the next time people say, let's all come together, I want you to think about what you just saw. Right? Now, does that mean that there's nowhere where everybody can work together? Yeah. We need to be thinking of ways where we can work together. That's right. Okay. But telling him to shut down, non-starter. Not going to happen. Okay. Or at least it's not going to happen voluntarily. All right. Thank you. Okay, let's do a little history. Okay, now if you have questions, you know, feel free. This is not church where I'm preaching. And I expect people to jump up today and ask questions there. But you can do that if you got a question. And there's no such thing as a bad question. The only bad questions are disrespectful questions. So you can ask whatever you want, as long as it's respectful. Yes.
Is it the best thing to do is to lead by example, by giving first? Make them want to give first?
Well, I'm going to answer that question later. Okay. Repeat your question.
So wouldn't the best thing to do is to lead by example, by giving first, and inspire them to give as well?
A better question for me is, what's the best thing to spread the gospel to the most people? Yes. Okay. And what regional conferences have proven over the last 80 years is that they are the best way of reaching people of color. Now, regional conferences are not only to reach people of color. And let me give you an example. Anybody heard of gentrification?
Yes.
Okay, gentrification is people, Caucasian people, moving back into the inner city. Okay? Yeah, right. Okay. That's where a lot of our churches are. Somebody has to reach those people. Okay? The churches in the suburbs probably are not going to do it. So that means we have a responsibility to reach our neighbors who now are people who don't look like us and who we're not trained to reach. So that means, and we've had this conversation, in order to reach the people in our neighborhood, we're going to have to reach out to people. We're going to have to get some Caucasian pastors. And I hired the first Caucasian pastor when I was president. Okay? We're going to have to diversify our staff because the people that we need to reach are diverse. Okay? So, if your question is, do regional conferences have a primary responsibility to reach people of color? Absolutely. Because if we don't do it, then who's going to do it? But is that the only people that we're called to reach? No. And we've got to have a serious conversation about how we're going to reach people who we were not trained to reach, but who moved back into African American neighborhoods. I preached in Philadelphia a couple of years ago, West Philadelphia. Remember the West? Remember the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, West Philadelphia? So I was born in the hood. Okay, so I was preaching in the hood. But when I left the church and I turned the corner, there were no more black people. It was all people who moved into that neighborhood. Okay, that church has to reach those people. That church has a responsibility to reach those people. That's right. That's right. And by whatever means necessary. If it means hiring somebody who looks like them, who can relate to them better, that's what they need to do. That's right. Okay? So I don't want anybody to think that when I talk about how successful we've been at reaching people of color, that's the only people we're supposed to reach. All right.
Question, sir?
Yes.
So is it my understanding then, I think I read someplace that in the Spirit of Prophecies that Ellen White, in her day, we don't want to judge her according to what's happening today, but according to what was happening in her day, she had suggested that the people of color preach to go out and win those people who are like them because of the tension in those days between black and white, between people of color and Caucasian people, not wanting to integrate and all those things. Integration might not have been heard of then. So she suggested that the white reach the white and the people of color reach the people of color. Is that right?
Yes. And she gets nailed for that because people look at that in the context of today. The reality is in the South, for us to have the kind of service we have now is a good way to get somebody killed. back in those days. Okay, so to jump on her when she said that makes no sense at all. You know, there was no alternative to doing what she suggested in Mississippi in 1890. There was no alternative. None, zero. There was no, I'm about to tell you what happened in the Adventist church. Okay? Beginning with, we're going to talk about 3 pivotal figures in regional conference history. This is Charles Kenny. Charles Kenny is, and by the way, in our building that we opened Tuesday, is the first Advent, not the first, but we're the first major Adventist African American History Museum. And he's one of the people that we're talking about. Charles Kenny. He's the first African American to be ordained. Okay? And he started off in the Midwest, ended up in St. Louis, baptized a bunch of people, brought them into the church. But remember, there were no African American churches. So this is 1890 or so. Okay? So imagine him bringing a bunch of black people into a Caucasian church then. You know how the Bible says there's joy in heaven? There might have been joy in heaven. It was not joy in St. Louis. His experience was so horrible. Now the white wrote about it. It was so horrific. And he was one of the first ones to say, maybe black people need to have their own entities. Here's the second one. We're talking about 3 pivotal figures in African American Adventist history. He is a pivotal figure in African American history without actually being an Adventist. Okay? He was a journalist back in the 30s and the 40s. Back in those days, if you were a journalist, you were not writing for the New York Times, okay, or the Washington Post. Black people could not do that. So black people had their own newspapers. When I was growing up, black people still had their own newspapers. Okay? And again, this is not intended to make any of our Caucasian brothers feel uncomfortable. It is an attempt for you to understand what it was like to be black, even as late as the 60s and the 70s. Okay? I grew up in an era where black people did not run anything outside of black churches. Nothing. There were no black mayors. There were no black governors. There were no black leaders in the church past the conference level. Nothing. There were in sports. There were no black coaches. There were no black quarterbacks. There was nothing. Okay? So Charles Barnett had Adventist friends who told him how difficult it was to be a Seventh-day Adventist in those days. Let me give you a couple of examples. At the General Conference headquarters in those days, Tacoma, Maryland, okay, if it was lunchtime and it was time to eat in the General Conference cafeteria, guess who wasn't eating in the General Conference cafeteria? People who look like me. Could not. Okay? Could not. Okay. At Andrews, where I went to school, it's a seminary, you could eat in the cafeteria, but only at the colored table. Colored table. Okay?
At Andrews.
At Andrews, yes. Okay? There were schools that people like me Adventist schools, who could not get into. One of the things I'm trying to research now is I've heard that in one northern state, north is not the south, that parents had to take the school to court and went all the way up to the state Supreme Court to force our schools to educate. Right? So Charles Barnett wrote about these atrocities and embarrassed the church. But now, here comes the straw that breaks the camel's back. Lucy Byard. Okay? Lucy Byard was a woman of Caribbean descent. Okay? Anybody from Caribbean descent? Okay. I did not say this morning that my first church was in the Caribbean. That's why I was very glad for dinner to see peas and rice. I learned I didn't know anything about peas and rice until I went to the West Indies to pastor. Okay? So I was very happy. Love, depending on where you live, rice and peas and rice. Where I lived, it was peas and rice. Okay? Went over there, knew nothing about West Indian culture. Didn't know anything about white sweet potato. Love white sweet potato. Now, I couldn't get into the drink. Malby. Way too strong. You pour a Malby, it just stands up by it. It just don't even get a glass. It just stands up by it. But no, let me tell you, I was the associate pastor, right? And I had never heard of malt. And where I lived, malt was a liquor, malt liquor. So I go grocery shopping with my senior pastor, and he grabs a 6-pack of Heineken malt, and I was going, y'all drink beer over here? Because it looks like beer. I enjoy learning about a new culture. I call myself the first American West Indian. So, Lucy Byard, she was from the Caribbean, had a form of cancer. She wanted to be treated in an Adventist hospital because the Adventist Church today runs one of the largest healthcare systems, private healthcare systems in the world. In the state of Florida, Advent Health is the largest employer in the state. Healthcare is a big deal in the Adventist church. So if any of you work for the Adventist church, pastor, and the healthcare system offers you a job, leave immediately. If they call you right now, yes, sir. Just tell them that you just rapture yourself on up to the healthcare system because they are not on the denominational pay scale. Right? The one place anybody makes money in the Adventist church is in the healthcare system. The people, I sat on their board, the people at the top of the system, 7 figures with 7-figure bonuses. Wow. And the only reason why I can tell you that is because it's public record. 7 figures, 7-figure bonuses. Because it is probably, when I was there, it was an $8 billion, that particular branch of, that's one branch. That particular branch was an $8 billion business. It's probably about $12 billion now. Okay? So if they call you, if they call you right now, just leave. Just go. Be sure to take Miss Pastor with you. Just leave. Because that's the one place in the Adventist church where there's money. It's the only place. Right? So she wanted to get treated at an Adventist hospital. In those days, you wrote for admission. She's in New York, like you are. She's from New York. She wrote to the hospital, Washington Sanitarium, Adventist. But both the state of Maryland and, worse yet, the Adventist church, the Adventist hospital in Maryland, had a prohibition in terms of treating black people in their hospital. The only way you get treated in Washington is that you had to go after hours. Okay, but in terms of regular admission, you could not be admitted. Okay, but 2 things happened. First of all, she wrote, and they admitted her. She showed up, and they admitted her. Anybody want to guess why they admitted her? She was very, very light. So they thought she was Caucasian. Okay? Until, I guess, either her husband showed up, or they looked on her she had to fill out an application, and form, and at which point she said what she was. So you know what happened? After they admitted her, they unadmitted her, put her out, stuck her in the hospital, in the hallway, where legend says she died. Now she didn't die in the hospital. She did die a few weeks later. Okay, and they shipped her off to what was then called Washington Freedmen's Hospital. That was a black hospital. Interestingly enough, that hospital today is called Howard University Hospital. Guess who runs Howard University Hospital? The Adventist Church. In fact, a young lady I grew up with is a CEO. So this enraged the Adventists, the black Adventists in Washington, who went to a church called Washington First Church, which had an unusually large number of educated black people for that day. The first black woman to finish the requirements for a PhD was an Adventist woman who went to that church. Her name was Eva B. Dykes. You go to Oakwood, the library is named after her. Okay? She was the second woman to finish went to that church. Okay? I found out years after she passed away, there was an older lady that they sent to be the principal of my school when I was a little child. She was a young teacher that went to that church. I wish she was alive because I have a lot of questions I can ask her in the position I have today. Okay, it enraged the church. So they formed the Committee for the Advancement of Worldwide Work Among Colored Seventh-day Adventists, which was in essence the black version of the NAACP. And they basically said, okay, we had enough. Enough of discrimination in education, enough of discrimination in administration. Do you know, ladies and gentlemen, it took the Adventist Church 100 years to have the first black administrator on the General Conference. 100 years. Okay? And then I already told you, blacks were not hired in. I went to Mount Vernon Academy, which is in the Columbia. Was in the Columbia before the church. I was a student when they had their first black teacher, right? And the school had been around for almost 100 years. Okay. So the uproar from Lucy Byard and the urging of the committee we just talked about. At the spring meeting of the General Conference meets twice a year. The executive committee of the General Conference, they meet twice a year, spring and fall. In the fall meeting, they voted to allow unions to establish what we call regional conferences today. They were called colored conferences then. Okay. Now, in the action that they took, they said something very significant. They said colored conferences to be administrated by colored pastors and colored executive committees. Why is that important? Because up until this time, black people were not allowed to run anything. Okay? Just like we have the women's ministry and the youth ministries, in those days they had the Negro department, okay, which was because we didn't have regional conferences, so that person led the work among black people. But guess which ethnicity the first 3 directors of the Negro department were? They were Caucasian. The first couple presidents of Oakwood were Caucasian. Even in Africa, the leaders of the work in Africa up through into the 80s were Caucasian. people that they imported from Europe and the United States. And it wasn't until black people were allowed to, on their own stuff, that the work exploded to the place where it is now. Okay, so I told you that the work had grown. The work has grown 4 times faster. And here's some statistics. I'm not going to take time to go through that, but I don't want to keep you. Okay, here's why I close. Are regional conferences still necessary? Let me give you 2 reasons. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. Okay, here's 2 reasons. Regional conferences are necessary because they allow regional conferences, they allow people of color to control their own resources. Okay. If there were no Northeastern Conference, then the work in Northeastern would be superintended by Greater New York. At a time, and think back 40 or 50 years when Greater New York was primarily a Caucasian conference. That would mean that in order for black people to do anything, they would have to get approval and a vote of Caucasian people. Okay? And that didn't always work. I don't know if I can put my hand on it right now, but I have somewhere on my computer is an action that one of our conferences that shall remain nameless took when they were having financial difficulties. Their solution to how to fix their financial difficulties were to cut the salaries of their black workers. Not the salaries of their to cut the, and that's what they did. That's what they did. Okay? So, remember now, does that mean that everybody back then on occasion was a bad? No, of course not. Of course not. But generally speaking, the church followed the word. And so the reality is we would not have what we have in regional conferences if we had to depend on other people to give it to us. Okay? So, for example, I just shared with you that we built a $9 million building that's how much it costs. That's not the estimated value. That's how much it costs. We built a $9 million building that we are dedicating debt-free. Do you know how much interest we saved on not borrowing $9 million for 30 years? That's literally millions of dollars. Okay? That's what happens when you control your own resources. Controlling your own resources means you decide how to do ministry in your area. Okay? That's critical. Okay? My brethren in California don't have regional conferences. So they have to operate on what's given to them as opposed to what they have. Right? So that's a critical element. We got to be able to control our own resources. Number 2, it's the best way to reach people of color. Okay? Number 3, it gives people of color a seat at the denominational decision-making table. Right? Because when I was a conference president, I was a delegate to General Conference because I was a conference president. If I wasn't a conference president, then I would have to depend on a state conference to say, okay, let's be fair. Let's try to get some black people in here. Okay? I don't have to ask. I have my own entity. So by virtue of having my own entity, and denominational boards are made up of entities. So if you don't have your own entity, you have to depend on somebody else to put you at the table. So I'll give you an example of why that's important. If years ago, there was a material that was being printed, and it did not depict diversity. You know, it made it look like the church was all one color, right? Because I had a seat at the table. Like I said, no, you gotta have this gotta look like there's some of us in the church. Okay? That's what happens when you have your own entity, right? Okay. Now, so I told you 3 reasons. 1, control of your own resources. That's just critical. That's no way we build that building. There's no way another entity was going to give us $9 million. That wasn't going to happen. We had $9 million because we control our own entity. All right? Good. Now, here's 3 myths, and then I'll be done. Getting rid, this is what people say, getting rid of regional conferences will bring about integration. That's not true, because to the extent conferences are either segregated or integrated, it's because churches are that way. Churches are made up, conferences are made up whichever way the churches are. And the truth of the matter is, most of our churches are mostly one color or the other. Okay? And if that were true, it would be true in California, on the West Coast. I've had the privilege of preaching in about 15 churches on the West Coast. Only one of them was integrated. Now, they don't have regional conferences, but their churches are every bit as one color or the other as the rest of the country. Right? So that's myth number 1. That's not true. Here's the Now, I'm warning everybody. Here's where it gets rigged. Okay? The inconvenient truth, the one-way nature of integration and multiculturalism in the United States. Okay? The reality is, now you guys are an exception, and our firm are. Okay? There is a level of two-way integration in your church. That is, no matter what you think, now you probably think most churches look like yours. They don't. Okay? This church still is primarily a church of color. But there is a level of diversity in your church that doesn't exist in most places. Okay? And that's to your credit. Okay? Most places, integration only happens one way, where people of color leave entities of color and go to the majority culture. What happens is, unfortunately, if enough people of color integrate a church, white flight is real. Okay? Real talk. My guess is, once upon a time, this church did not look like it looks now.
That's right. That's right.
Okay. All right. So, here's the challenge. The one-way nature of integration ultimately results in resegregation. Okay? And Greater New York is a prime example of that. It's not the only one. Florida, England, that's just the way it is. Okay? So, I did this at the seminary, but I did it by Zoom, and one of the students said, black people are in search of diversity, but diversity is not in search of black people. Generally speaking, right? And so we have to be, you can't blame regional conferences for that. Okay? Regional conferences are not the cause. Regional conferences are the result of segregation. Okay. Myth number 3, it would be easy to dismantle regional conferences. So when people say, let's all come together It's as if they think you just wave their hand and regional conferences will go away. The reality is regional conferences and state, somebody would have to vote. So let's imagine Northeastern and Greater New York coming together, all right? If we're coming together, merging means we don't need as many people to run one. So then who stays and who goes, all right? And because everybody who leaves, we have to give them a severance check. So you get rid of a bunch of people, you write a bunch of checks. Okay? Then Northeastern and Greater New York are on two separate retirement plans. Okay? The Northeastern Conference is on the old-fashioned pension plan. Now, fortunately, it's a lot better than the old one, where you work 40 years and get like $1,200 a month. I want to see how you live in New York on that. The regional conference is considerably better. All right. So, but you tell me that if I'm in Northeastern, like my pastor, okay, so you tell them let's all come together. You get rid of his pension. What's he supposed to do now? Because the state conferences, you manage your own pension plan. So one of my friends, state conference, he said, okay, tell me about your plan. He said, because you do a portion of your income, and up to a point the conference matches. And I don't give you a whole lot. But so over time, then you have to manage it. You have to manage it. Okay? So he said, I have $300,000 in my portfolio. That sounds like a lot of money. I don't have anywhere near that. Okay? But think about it for a minute. Think about it for a minute. $300,000. If all he has is $300,000 to get him from retirement to death, he gotta die. That's not much. He gotta die. If he lives a long time, he in trouble. That's right. Okay? So, there's the equivalent. What I have is 2 or 3 times the overall value of what I have is like 2 or 3 times that. Okay. So, but if he comes over, if Northeastern dissolves, and to show you the let's all come together, but that means you come. About 40 years ago, there was a proposal by the union that says we're gonna break Northeastern up. That's how we're gonna merge. Now, Northeastern is by far the biggest thing in Atlantic Union, by far. About half the union is Northeastern. But their proposal was not that the little teeny, not the Southern New England and Northern New England, little tiny conferences to merge into Northeastern. The proposal was Northeastern merged into these other conferences. Because again, in the mind of the majority, integration means you come to us. Okay? That's what we live in. And so to dismantle that, you can't just wave your hand and do that. Okay. So, that's an abbreviated version of why we have regional conferences. Right? Questions? Yes. No.
President, even now, the same for the GC, it would be hard. What's it hard? You probably not going to get as much representation on those high positions. In the future, you don't think still?
We've had that conversation with the region, with the GC president. I do not think and I told the GC president that. I don't think that there's enough representation of African Americans. But to be fair to him, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has done, for all the criticism that we level at each other, the Seventh-day Adventist, I don't think there's another denomination that would trade their structure for ours. Okay? There's hardly a place you can go where there's not a Seventh-day Adventist. We are in There's about 240 countries in the world. We're in 215 of them. There's no other church besides the Catholic Church that can say that. Okay. So, it is difficult to get everybody in the building. Because you got on the GC, they probably have, the president told me, they have 70 different countries represented. So to get everybody in the building is not realistic. They would have to be like 3 times the size that they have. So I do, Doug has to, and I told him this. I said, Mr. President, if the question is, have you gone as far as I would like, no, you haven't. But to say you haven't done anything, that's not true. Not true. Not true. There is a level of diversity on that level. The treasurer is black. Yes. There's never been a black, and again, it shows you the challenges that we have. For me to say in 2020, here's the first black treasurer of the General Conference. Okay, but he's there, and he's there because the president appointed him. Okay, so there is a level of diversity, and I admit I'm selfish because I'm looking out for the regional work. And so he may have gone as far as he can, given the fact there's 200 countries, and you can't have 200 nations at the general. You can't do that. Right. Yes, ma'am.
Are there any women in these conferences?
Yes. Yes.
I know there's like 3 female pastors. I think there's 2 in these.
There is a female. Actually, the first female vice president was an African American woman. She just retired, and she was replaced by a Caucasian. So there's a female vice president on the General Conference level. There's a female vice president on the North American Division level. Okay, so yeah, the bigger fight is not on that level. It's getting churches to accept female pastors. That's right. That's where the fight is. There's not a fight on that level. You all have.
People into these, it's more HR or
okay, I'm going to answer this. Let me finish. Yeah. You all have the first African American in the equivalent of a vice president. That's what I'm going to be tomorrow. The union secretary, which is the vice president in Columbia Union, is a female, black female. Okay, so the fight isn't on that level. No. The fight's on the local level with getting churches to agree to accept female pastors. That's the fight.
The church, you mean the people?
Yes.
The people.
That's the fight. Y'all are the problem. That's true. Yes. I can tell you as a former president, y'all, the local people, and interesting enough, some of my biggest pushback came from other women.
That's true.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So when do you actually vote? When does this happen? I never heard anything when we were supposed to vote. Is there some around or something like that?
The general conference happens every 5 years.
Every 5 years.
And so does the union. In fact, the unions typically come after the same year as general conference after. So you guys the Atlantic Union just had their election. I don't know.
Where do you go to do it?
I'm sorry?
Where do they actually have it?
So the next one will be St. Louis.
The church member has to attend this in order to vote?
Okay, here's
delegates go to vote.
Delegates go to vote. Lots of people, when you go to general conference, the average person there is not a delegate. Okay, so when I was in San Antonio in 2015, there were probably 70,000 people there on Saturday. 2,500 of them were delegates. Okay, yeah. So delegates are voted. Each union gets so many delegates based on your size. Okay. But I'm going to say it again. The problem getting women in positions in the church is not a problem on the GC or on the NAD or the union level. It's a problem on the local level.
Why do you think that is?
And women again, women.
Okay.
Because
There-
men have always been the pastors and women just feel more comfortable with that style.
I think for some of us, we are most of us are a product of our background. Okay, so I remember now, and I'm not saying this braggadociously at all, but I hired the first females in my conference. Okay, but I know the journey I took to get there. You know, if you had seen me in my 20s, you would have said and this is the same person that's going to hire a female. You would have said that's not going to happen. And so I know how I evolved. I had a friend, and she was the first first female I ever knew that said, I'm going to be a pastor. I said, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard in my life. Because, but let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you what happened to me. See, sometimes the Lord has to make you go through stuff. I was a young pastor in a church with the sorriest men ever. But they had positions because of their gender. Okay? So one by one, they did dumb stuff that made me get rid of them. Okay? The first one I had to get rid of was one of my leaders, who shall remain nameless, who was having an affair. And I was telling him that day, I was a very young, he was old enough to be my father, and I had to go to him and say, oh, you can't do this. I never will forget what he said to me. And this is the reason why people are going to be lost. Understand that our tendency towards sin is so strong that if you're not connected to a thus saith the Lord, you will talk yourself into hell and it'll make sense. Wow. Okay. Because this is what this brother said to me. He said, now he's having an affair. And I know who he's having an affair with. She's the ditziest. I was like, you obviously are not with this woman for her mind. I said, now I know her and I know your wife. Your wife looks I didn't say this to him. Your wife looks way better. It would make, I could almost understand if you were married to the person you're cheating with and you were cheating with the person you married. I could almost understand it. But this is what he told me. He said, he looked at me, and this was 100 years ago, and I still remember. He said, I believe God will be glorified in this relationship. That's what he said. Word for word. That's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you. On a small level, we all do that. That's what sin is. Sin is knowing better, but telling yourself sin is not sin. And here's the hard part about being a pastor. This is what I've learned. That not only can people talk themselves into hell, but they are enabled by church members who tell them, you don't have to do that. You don't have to listen to them. They don't like you, blah, blah, blah. I call them cheerleaders to hell. But this is the hard lesson I learned when I was a pastor. Everybody in the church who's wrong, no matter how wrong they are, has somebody else in the church telling them they're not wrong. So I'm up here preaching, and the Holy Spirit is whipping you, and then you get home, and somebody says, oh, I'm not doing that. And that's why a bunch of Adventists are going to be lost. And that's why, see, we go around saying stuff, all sin is the same. No, it's not. All sin isn't the same. If all sin was the same, there'd be no such thing as the unpardonable sin. All sin is not the same. Okay? And one of the things that God takes most seriously is leading somebody else astray. And there's going to be a bunch of people lost because they listen to the wrong person. That's why you better be careful who's in your ear. And if you're not grounded in thus saith the Lord yourself, the person in your ear is going to talk you into hell, and it's going to make sense. Because they're telling you to do what you want to do anyway.
So we can't say the devil made me do it most of the time.
No.
It's within us.
You did it because you wanted to. We did it. That's us. Think about it for a minute. This has nothing to do with what I'm saying. I'm preaching again. I'm going to finish in a few minutes. I'm the only one that's got to drive 80 miles back to your hotel. Okay. And plus, you don't have your controversy. Okay. But Tim, here's the advantage that the devil has over us. Number one, we have a weakened will. Number two, we have a propensity to do what's wrong. Okay, think about it for a minute. Those of you have, Pastor, you have a little 18, well, how was she, like 18 months?
8 months.
8 months, okay. I saw her, we were taking a picture, and she grabbed for the plate. She was going to dump that plate on the floor. The only reason why she didn't do it was we caught her. She was reaching out, she was going to throw that thing on the floor. Did anybody teach her to do that? No, did you sit down and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. Today we're going to learn how to dump food all over the place. This is what we're going to do. Nobody, writing on the walls, crayon. Nobody teaches your child that. Okay? The Bible says boy, think about it. Think about it. Little child, they cry, they dry, fed, because they know you're going to pick them up. Yeah. They really, and that's the first lie. That's really what it is. No, it is that. They're saying there's something wrong with me. They lie before they know how to talk. That's how ingrained sin is in us. Equally ingrained is making excuses for it. Okay? It started off with Adam. Eve gave him the fruit. He said, I'm going down with this shit. Eve, I love you so much. I'm going down with you until God showed up. And he said, oh, what's up with this? And as soon as he says, no sooner were words out of God's mouth, the woman who you gave me, he's taking them both down. He's taking God and Eve down. I was minding my own business. And I woke up and I was missing a rib. That's you. Isn't that right? Yes. And then he turns to Eve. Eve says, the serpent. Now, and by the way, why are we talking God? I didn't create the serpent. You did that. Wow. And ever since, I can tell you, as somebody who's been an administrator for a while, it is very difficult for people to own their foolishness. Yeah. So that's the reason why, unless you have your own relationship with the Lord, none of us have a chance. Because we got all these headwinds. Our own nature, our unconverted friends, and our enablers. And here's the problem. Some of y'all look for enablers. Yeah. As soon as somebody tells you the truth, you don't want to hear it anymore. Okay, wait, I saw somebody saying. I'm going to wrap up. Yes.
It's so funny that you guys talk about like this right here. Okay. Do you remember what it says?
Yes.
I'll read it. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding in all your ways. Submit to Him and He will make your path straight. And this is something I've been doing since I didn't understand it until like 3 days ago. And I saw something about you don't have to be a prophet to talk to the Lord and just offer praise and worship towards Him. And I decided to replace all my thoughts with thanking God and worshiping towards God. So if I didn't know, someone has to be like, oh, where do I buy this TV? first thing I think about, I just start singing a song to God, and it'll come to me in that way. And I don't understand it, but it's been working and saving like the past few days, and everything's been working out. So I don't even think anymore. I'm in that peace, appreciating God.
And that's wonderful. Here's the challenge. That has to be a daily thing. And here's the real challenge. Here's the real challenge. You do that, right? And that's good. But the closer you get to the Lord, the more the Lord shows you what's wrong with you. Okay? And that's where most people get off the ship. Because getting close to God means you got to drop some stuff. Okay? You guys, there's some, I mean, I'm still, the Lord's still telling me, okay, you got to stop doing that, you got to stop blah, 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 blah. I mean, that's a sanctification of the work of my life. And it's hard work because it goes against our nature. And when you don't want to do it, you can always find an excuse not to do it. And that's why there has to be a daily connection. All right, I'm giving myself, I'm stopping myself at 5 o'clock. So you all can have your concert. Yes.
Yeah, person told me, and they mentioned, said, there will be all the separation of churches, conferences will continue until Christ comes. That's what they said. Is that realistic?
Well, again.
Knowing all of what we know, what's in spirit, prophecy, Bible, everything.
Okay.
Is that really?
The question, and it's a good question, almost closed on. The question is, what's the best thing for a mission? What's the best thing that's going to help us reach the most people? And regional conferences have demonstrated that in terms of reaching people of color. And I would venture to say, were it not for regional conferences, this church wouldn't be here. Because when you couldn't come to a church like this, there were regional conferences. Okay? So regional conferences paved the way for churches like this. Now, the flip side is, what's the best way to reach people who are not African Americans? Right? Okay? I still think, generally speaking, it is still easier to win people with whom you have the most in common. Now, there's obviously some exceptions to that. There's obviously some exceptions to that. But I think generally speaking, and we are having a challenge reaching both African Americans who were born in this country and Caucasians. Okay. The Caucasian church is hardly growing at all. And the African American church isn't growing like it used to. The African American churches, regional conferences, are to a greater degree than is healthy. And hear what I'm saying. Have been, their growth is immigrant growth. Now, I'm saying I started off in the Caribbean. So, bringing all the Caribbean people you can find. But we also got to baptize people who aren't Hispanics and not Caribbean. We got baptized some people. We talk about there being no Caucasian churches. There are no African American churches in Northeastern either. Okay, most of our churches on the East Coast are predominantly West Indian.
I think West Indians are more accustomed to diversity. We don't have a difficulty dealing with different people because right in our own country, it's so mixed. So we don't have that sense of this and that.
Whatever the reason is, we gotta baptize people who were born here too.
Yes.
And that's our struggle. it's a bigger struggle with Caucasians, and it may be more of a class thing than it is a race thing. Because as more black people have moved into middle class, you know, our problem is I used to tell people in South Central, we don't do well when we do well. You know what I mean by that? You know, the better off we are, the harder it is to hear the gospel. Okay? So it may be less of a race thing and more of a class thing. We're not reaching the middle class of anybody. Black people, white people. But we gotta fix it. Forget rich people. Forget rich people. I'm talking about just middle class people. Okay? So that's a problem that we gotta fix. Okay. Now I'm trying to let y'all out. Wait. Okay, let me go to these two ladies and then I'm done. Because then y'all gonna say, now the admin cameras, when I did. Okay, yes.
In terms of African Americans, I know from a lot of there's a rejection of Christianity. There's a rejection of Christianity because of the feeling that somehow it has burden. Yes.
Okay.
And
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that.
Could you repeat that? Can't hear you.
I'm saying that for a lot of friends that I have, those who are African American, they have just rejected Christianity. Because
Jews have rejected
totally
also because of the Holocaust.
Okay, before you do that, before I go to you, because I want to say this before, because you're going to be the last question. Another thing that's hurting us, and I can say this in a church that has a lot of West Indians, there is, at least in some places, a tension between African Americans and West Indians.
That's true.
Which is the stupidest fight ever. It's the stupidest fight ever. Because we all came from the same place. Y'all just got dropped off in better weather. That's the only difference. And I wish I had gotten dropped off. Because when I lived in the Caribbean and it never got below 80 degrees and there was a breeze blowing, I have never been able to deal with cold weather ever since. So I envy y'all getting dropped off. That's a stupid fight.
Yes.
Yes.
Is it true that, I'm not sure if Ellen White said this, I think so, but I don't want to misquote her. Is it true that in the latter days, the two conferences, the separation of black and white, will be our dirty wash? It will work towards our demise. The Catholic Church is going to make it a big thing.
Well, that is something that is thrown at the Adventist Church. But the reality is, the Adventist Church isn't any more segregated than any other church. So if you go to the Baptist Church, okay, you're not going to find a bunch of Caucasians in the inner city, in a Baptist church. Okay? Now you will find upper income black people in a suburban Baptist white church. But that's true of us. Okay? So I think that a lot of that criticism comes from us, where we say the Adventist church is not anymore. Now that isn't to say that we don't have our own baggage to deal with. We do. Right? And to say we're no better, we're no worse, that's not good either. Because we're supposed to be better. Right? But it is what it is. And the point I want to make in closing is the Lord has taken something bad and turned it into something good, because we've been able to reach people at a level that we would not have been able to reach them before. Okay? And I'm not sure that if we all come together, understanding first of all what all come together means, that I'm not sure that if we did that, we would be able to grow the church at the rate that we've been able to grow. Okay? I don't think, think about it for a minute. And then here's what I'm done. I was in a meeting with some of my fellow administrators, and we were having that kind of honest conversation we've had today, which I think is important. I think it's important. And it was a two-way conversation. Okay, where our Caucasian brother talked about. I mean, I've had conversations with some of my Caucasian friends where they talked about things that we do that make them uncomfortable. Okay, so you need to have an honest conversation. Okay, an honest conversation with our Caucasian brethren say that part of their problem, and they came to the doorstep of saying this, but they wouldn't cross the threshold. Okay, but part of their problem is trying to start something that reaches Caucasians, and then a bunch of African Americans showed up. Now they couldn't cross over, but that's really what they were saying. Okay, so I had to fill in the blank for them. and this is what I told them. I said, listen, our church is not going to reach its potential until Caucasians start joining this church. Y'all do what you have to do to grow this church. If just like we have a black caucus, if you need to have a white caucus, have it. Ain't none of us gonna call you racist, because we need you to grow your end of the church. Okay, so do what you got to do, and we have to reach middle class people. And again, if you look at our Caucasian, if you look at the Caucasian side of the church, we in trouble. Because that side of the church is aging out of the building. You know, we all are having trouble keeping our young people. We all doing that. Okay? But our Caucasian brothers are not replacing the people that they're losing through death and all that kind of as fast as they need to. Okay? So that's the reason why I have these kind of honest, serious conversations that say, okay, here's how we got to where we got. Okay, now what's the best thing to do for mission? And whatever that is, we need to do. All right. Amen. Thank you very much, ladies.
We'd like to thank Pastor Edwin for a powerful presentation. Not only did he bless us in the morning for the sermon, but in the afternoon for the presentation that we needed to know. I love these forums, and I just want to make it very clear, it's in person, not in Zoom, where some people think you have the faces, Pastor. It is so much better. I'm just asking, we're trying to stay on time. We're going to continue. Please, if you could just please stay. Do not leave now. We're just going to do Patchogue next song, and then we're going to have our concert by Brother Robert Bailey. I appreciate that very, very much if you could stay. Yes. Do I have that, church? Yes. I mean, I'm not going to say if one person trickles out. I'm going to embarrass, like, what are you doing? I'm not talking out. I'm just saying, one or two. I know the pastor's school. I already know that. But, that's what he was. At this time, we're going to call the Patchogue men, and we welcome all men. If you want, we're gonna do our singing right now. I think one or two people heard. I think Sister Joy heard us. She was up here when she heard us, so she knows. So she heard us while we were rehearsing. Hope we sound the same. Let's go, guys. Listen, you know when you try to get recruits, we still have. Robert Bailey can still join us too. Even Pastor Evan can join us. All men, if you're more than welcome. All you need is him. Come on up here. 2:13. Jesus is coming again.